We're learning the Sikha on Gimmel Tammuz in Chelek Chav Ches on page 124. The shir today is being learned L'Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rabbi Menashe Kolfman. Gimmel Tammuz, der Tag, wenn Kvektushas Mervichomi Admur is befreit geworden from Beisa Asurim, the day of Gimmel Tammuz, when the Frierdiker Rebbe was released from prison, Faltois B'Kameshonim B'Smichas to Shabbos Parshas Chukas, comes out to be in many years in the week near the Shabbos of Parshas Chukas. Amal in the Vach from Parshas Chukas, sometimes in the week itself of the Parsha of Chukas, or Lufamim in the Tag V'Alachaver Mizbarech von Shabbos Parshas Chukas, and sometimes in the days of the week following Shabbos Parshas Chukas. Und Leuten wir wissen Wort von Shalah. There's the famous saying of the Shalah, as alle Mayadi Ashana Kail Oich Mayadim Derabana, that all of the Yom Tovim of the year, including those that were instituted later by the Chachamim, Zenen Nirmaz in the Parashiyas HaTorah V'Lechem Leint in the Shapsais Mezizenachal, are hinted in the Parasha of the week that is read in that time when it comes out. Is verstandig, so it's understood as es is da a remez in Parshas Chukas of the Geula from Gimmel Tammuz. There's a hint in the Parsha, in Parshas Chukas, for the redemption of the Frierdiker Rebbe on the day of Gimmel Tammuz. And the Geula von Rebbe sind gewähnt zwei Kloles de geschlafen. In the redemption of the Frierdiker Rebbe, there were two general stages. Gimmel Tammuz is befreit geworden from Beis Asurim. On the 3rd of Tammuz, he was freed from prison. Aber man hat ihm dann verschickt in Golus of 3 Jahr. But then, at that point, he was exiled for 3 years. Erst danach, it's only later, 10 days later, by Yud Beis, Yud Gimmel Tammuz, on the 12th and 13th of Tammuz, is in ganzen befreit geworden. That's when he was completely freed. Euch von der Verschickung, from this exile as well, and hat sich gekannt umkehren le Beisai, and he was able to return back home. Kumtais, so that means, as by Gimmel Tammuz is given the Escholas Agula. Gimmel Tammuz is the beginning of his redemption. On Yud Beis Yud Gimmel Tammuz is given the Shleimus Agula. And then on Yud Beis and Yud Gimmel is the completion of his redemption. High time is Faran an Iloi in Gimmel Tammuz legabe Yud Beis Yud Gimmel Tammuz. So it's for this reason that there's something greater about the day of Gimmel Tammuz in connection to the Frierdiker Rebbe's redemption, even more than Yud Beis and Yud Gimmel Tammuz. As the Chag HaGola is nikva geworden. If Yud Beis Yud Gimmel Tammuz dafke, although the actual celebration was established to be on Yud Beis and Yud Gimmel Tammuz, is das weil der Inyan von der Chag v'simcha geluya is men keveyev and the Gola is b'shleimus. That's because a yontif and the time when you rejoice the redemption that's established when you have the complete redemption. Al derech vi birchas ha-Gimmel, similar to birchas ha-Gimmel that is said when you're freed from prison. Was der Rebbe hat gemacht erst nach the Gula b'Yud Beis Tammuz. The Frierdiker Rebbe only made the bracha when he was fully released and freed from exile as well on Yud Beis Tammuz. Weil man kennet machen the bracha ad sheyetze ma'asakana legamri, because you don't make the bracha of ha-Gimmel until you're completely out of danger, or in a case where a person is ill and he also has to make the birchas ha-Gimmel ad sheyachzer leburi legamri, until one returns to his full health. So therefore the Yom Tif, the celebration, is established to be on the day of Yud Beis Tammuz. Aber at the same time, though, in Etzem Inyan HaGeola, in the essence of the redemption, is da an Ilui in Ascholas HaGeola legabe Shleimus HaGeola. There's something greater about the beginning of the redemption than the completion of the redemption. The reason is, weil neus of lezet, was in der Aschale is, da die Meile, was man brecht durch die Schwierigkeit von Kol Aschales Kashe is, in addition to the fact that in the beginning, there's something unique where there's a breakthrough. The beginning is difficult. But also, hayais, as by der Aschales Agula, tut sich auf der Shinne, since at the beginning is when the change is taking place. Vad lo hafchoi, hamatze von Golas Geile zu Gola, to make the complete change from exile to redemption. So that's the point that you have only at the beginning. And to add another point to the specific redemption by the Frierdiker Rebbe, or befrat benitten die done specifically here in this case, was the shinui hamatzav v'pashtus, the change of condition. And simply, was hat sich aufgetan durch der Gula b'Gimmel Tammuz that happened on this day, the redemption of Gimmel Tammuz, which is the befreiung from Beis Asurim, or befrat in the Umstände von der Medina Ahi bei Yom Mehem, when the Frierdiker Rebbe was released from prison, and especially the prison in communist Russia in those times. Und ibegein afile in a matze von Golas, in Anira Chayka, and there being transferred into the condition where he, even if he had to be exiled in a faraway city, ist gewähnt bekam Pratem geresser wie der Shinne wie Chiluk von sein Begeula und Areisgein Chavshile Beisai. It's a bigger change and a bigger redemption than what happened 10 days later on Yud Beis Tammuz, where he was allowed to return back home from the city that he was exiled in. Und befragt, als ich sein, die Gnachten bei Beisai, ist gewähnt unter der Ashgache von Memshala Ahi. Especially that even after he was allowed to go back home, the Frierdiker Rebbe was still under surveillance from the government. So it wasn't really a full redemption in that sense, comparatively to where he was in his exile. So therefore, the greatest change is the day that he was released from prison. That was the beginning. So as the Chidua, so since this is the beginning of the redemption, it's known as the Ascholef in Yeder Inyan, as in the Ascholef in Yeder Inyan is called the ganze Zach. In the beginning of whatever matter it may be, that includes everything that follows and develops later. Al derech wie me gefindt in the meaning von Rashi Tevis, just as you find regarding words, where there's the first letter of the word, an inyan al pi Teire, an oich beteire, something that's according to Teire, and it's used and it's found in Teire itself, as the erste ois von an Wort is meramis of the ganze Wort. The first letter of the word being the beginning hints to the entire word. And other examples where you see that the beginning of something includes in it everything that comes out later and is developed. So the same is true here as well. As the ganze Geule von Reben is given nirmaz und kolol in der Ascholes HaGeule von Gimmel Tammuz. The entire redemption that was only completed on Yud Beis Tammuz is all included in the beginning of the Geula on the day of Gimmel Tammuz. So what's the content of this redemption? What's the story of the Frierdiker Rebbe when he was imprisoned? The Teichen Klali von the Meister Geule von Reben. The general story of what happened with the imprisonment and then the redemption of the Frierdiker Rebbe is doch verbunden mit seiner Weide von Arbotzes HaTeire, Vachzokes HaYades, Vachatzassan in Medina Ahi. It's all in connection with the Frierdiker Rebbe strengthening Teire, spreading Yiddishkeit in communist Russia. Was die Aveide bei Yom HaMeheim hat gefordert Mesiras Nefesh Bepoil. And this work in those years demanded literal self-sacrifice. Und noch mehr, furthermore, wie gerät kam upon him, as was explained already a number of times, is das gewend nit stam am Mesiras Nefesh. We're not talking over here about an ordinary level of self-sacrifice. Nor am Mesiras Nefesh, beli hagbalas uncheshbeines. A level of self-sacrifice without any limitations or any calculations. Wenn man sich hereingelost in a cheshben, if you would begin to think of making a calculation, what is the likelihood to have success in this kind of work? There would be no room to continue with this work of spreading Yiddishkeit. And definitely not to invest so much to the point of self-sacrifice. And even more so, nicht zu einstellen die Lebens von Talmidah, Shlucha, Tzalib der Aveda, not to put in danger the life of his students and his Shluchim that he sent to all the different cities in Russia to do this work. Und der Meifin von Mesiras Nefesh, on keine Cheshbainis, this level of self-sacrifice, without any calculations, hat man gesehen, begoli beim Rebbe in sein Oibe de Matan Hage Bechlal, was seen in an open way by the Frierdiker Rebbe in his entire behavior here in his work in Russia, and especially this was expressed in the day of his redemption on Gimmel Tammuz, bis as the etzem tarach von Gimmel Tammuz b'shayches to the Geule, the month of Zam Mesiras Nefesh. The very date of Gimmel Tammuz in connection to the redemption of the Frierdiker Rebbe reminds of his tremendous level of Mesiras Nefesh, Kedul Kaman, as will be explained in the story of what happened on that day. Now, wie Schleimar could be said about this, as das was the Geule von Gimmel Tammuz is given verbunden mit der Tage von Mesiras Nefesh, the fact that the day of Gimmel Tammuz was a redemption, that the story of this redemption had in it this level of Mesiras Nefesh, on Keinag Bolas von Cheshbon, without any limitations or calculations, is weil in der Aschale von der Geule hat sich gedacht ausdrücken der Teuchen Klali von der Meister Geule. Because at the beginning of the redemption, which is the main point of the redemption, here is where the essence of what the story and the whole imprisonment and redemption is about is all encapsulated and expressed in this. Therefore, here the Rebbe will share the story of what happened with the beginning of the redemption on Gimmel Tammuz, which will prove this point, how we see expressed the tremendous Mesiras Nefesh on this level, on this day. The Rebbe, the Balagulav HaSimcha, erzählt, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the one that redeemed and the Bala Simcha related the story as Donnerstag, Rosh Chodesh Tammuz for Mittag, that it was on Thursday, which was Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, and it was before noon. Hat man ihm angesagt die Idee, as mal Oster reis von Beis Asurim, he was notified that he's being released from prison, man verschickt ihm auf 3 Jahre Galus in dem Stadt Kastrama. And he's being exiled for 3 years to the city Kastrama. Dabei hat man ihm gelost wissen, and then they notified him, as Batog wird man ihm befreien von Tfise, that during the day he'll be released from prison. Man hat ihm die Leib zu verbringen 6 Schau mit seinen Bnei Bayis, and they're giving him 6 hours to spend with his family. Und ihm angesagt, dass bei Nacht wird Muslim verlassen die Stadt und fahren in Kastrama. And then in the evening, he'll have to leave the city and travel to Kastrama on a train. Also wie das given Donnerstag, being that this is a Thursday, hat der Rebbe gefragt, so the Friedrich Rebbe asks them, when wird ankommen in Kastrama? When will he arrive with the train to Kastrama? Hat man ihm geantwortet, als wird ankommen Shabbos, that he's going to arrive on Shabbos. Hat der Rebbe gesagt, so the Friedrich Rebbe answers, as Shabbos wird b'shemayfen nicht fahren. That on Shabbos, under no circumstances will he travel. Und erst nach a spezielle Stadlos in die Kreisen von der Memschale, and only after a special effort that was made by the government officials, hat man gepeilt, dass der Rebbe soll kennen, fahren Sonntag Gimmel Tammuz. They succeeded in convincing them that instead the Friedrich Rebbe will travel on Sunday, the 3rd of Tammuz, bis damals ist geblieben in Turme. And until Sunday, he remained imprisoned. Eine von die, was haben bepeilt durchgeführt, der Arrest von Rebbe, hat gesagt dem Rebbe, so one of those that actually arrested the Friedrich Rebbe, told the Friedrich Rebbe then, als wird it maskem sein, zu fahren Donnerstag bei Nacht und ankommen Shabbos in Kastrama, that if he will not agree to leave Thursday night and then arrive in Kastrama on Shabbos, wird ihm nicht rauslassen von Turme. That he won't be released from prison at all. Hatten der Rebbe geantwortet, oder Friedrich Rebbe was persistent, and he answered, as is great zu bleiben in Turme, wieviel soll nicht sein. He's ready to remain in prison as long as necessary, aber bis Shabbos wird b'shemayfen nicht fahren. But on Shabbos, under no circumstances will he travel. This is the story of the redemption of the day of Gimmel Tammuz. Azan Hage, zu stellen sich mit Azat Teukef nicht zu fahren Shabbos, this behavior of the Friedrich Rebbe, to stand so firmly, not to be ready to travel and to arrive on Shabbos, needs to be clarified. Durch sein Absagen sich zu ausfolgendem Befehl zu fahren gleichen Kastrama, the fact that the Friedrich Rebbe refused to listen and to travel immediately to Kastrama, wenn wir schon gewähnt muchen im Befreien von Turme, when they were ready to release him from prison, bleiben in Turme, and because of this to remain another few days in prison, hat der Rebbe sich hereingestellt gleich in a matzav von Vadai Sakana. The Friedrich Rebbe is placing himself immediately in a definite danger. And the reason is, Melachat Chile is doch auf ihm gewähnt a Gzardin von Hepech HaChaim Rachmana Litzlan. Originally, the decree on the Friedrich Rebbe was the opposite of life, God forbid. Not durch Gestadlus, haben die Gzeire mevatel gewähnt, but after much effort, so this decree was nullified. Und es verbitten auf dem leichteren Einisch, and it was exchanged for the lighter punishment von 10 Jahren. Originally it was to be exiled for 10 years. Und danach 3 Jahre in Galus. And then following that, to be exiled for 3 years. Und euch noch then, even after they succeeded in getting this, that it should be lighter, only to be exiled for 3 years, haben die welche, haben lechat Chelek, gegeben, dem Gzardin Arishan Anal, sehr der nicht gebitten. Those that originally did decree what they did in the beginning, that it should be opposite of life, didn't really change their opinion. What they gezwungen von der höheren Memschale-Kreisen, they were forced by the higher-ups in the government, as bleibendig betafkidem und betakvam, sollen sie aber mevatel sein, dem Prat Urteil befreien dem Rebbe von Turme. That these ones that actually arrested the Friedrich Rebbe, remaining in their position, that they should see to it that the Friedrich Rebbe should be released and should be exiled. It's doch move on, but it's understood as Beifen Zeh is sein bleiben bereshusam in Turme gewinnt Sakanas Nefashos Mamish. So if so, remaining under their jurisdiction in prison, since they only begrudgingly were ready to free him, so to remain in prison was a real danger. Aber frat, as das Gufa was der Rebbe hat sich abgesagt zu fahren im Shabbos, and especially that this itself, that the Friedrich Rebbe refuses to travel on Shabbos, hat bei sehr gerufen a kas neusef a gadol. This only angered them more and even greater. Ameride gegen their Pekuda. This is a new rebellion against their command. And additionally, mefarsen gewen in Zeir Torme Shmiras Shabbos. This is publicizing in their prison system the importance of keeping Shabbos. And it's something that was publicized to everybody. Hapkidim, V'hasidim, both the prisoners and the others, the guards there, everybody knew about this, that the Friedrich Rebbe refuses to leave because of Shabbos. Nit können durchführen sehr mizimut zu goyim sein, as the Rebbe soll fahren Shabbos. And they could not fulfill their plan and wish to get the Friedrich Rebbe to travel on Shabbos. So this is a very immediate and sort of definite danger. Avadai sakana. But on the other hand, wie bald die Yitzia mi Beisa Asurim hat gedarft sein Donnerstag by Tag. Since the release of the Friedrich Rebbe was supposed to be Thursday by day, is doch der Inyan von Chile Shabbos, so the fact that this would lead to desecrating Shabbos, given Aleph nit boises man klau. That wasn't something that was yet at that moment. It's still Thursday. Beis blois beged a suffix. And the fact that there'll have to be a Chile Shabbos it's a doubt. The kamis fakis. It's not only one suffix. A few different things could happen here that will prevent them or will not be necessary to desecrate Shabbos. Warum ist es doch noch der Befreiung bei Yom Chavishi gewesen, noch a größere Möglichkeit von der Stadlos und bei einer Hangasse von Rebbe? Because after the Friedrich Rebbe would be released on Thursday, there would be an even greater possibility to make the effort, and by the Friedrich Rebbe leading the effort, as soll nicht darfen fahren gleich bei Nacht. That he shouldn't have to leave immediately that night and to end up traveling on Shabbos. Und a viele Eimer wollte es nicht gekannt beweisen in der kurzen Zeit, and even if they wouldn't succeed in this short period of time, is geblieben a ganze me'es le'es von Nesiyah b'Shabbos. There's still a full 24-hour period if they begin the travel Thursday night until Shabbos comes in, was b'meshach zman zeh is gewähnt die Möglichkeit l'Stadlos Gedoyla, also soll sich abstellen mitten weg bis noch Shabbos. That's that they can make a very big effort to stop the train during the way and to remain somewhere until after Shabbos. Und a viele Rebbe wollte gewähnt gezwungen bleiben in Bahnwagen bei Yom Shabbos. And even if the Friedrich Rebbe would be forced to remain on the train throughout Shabbos, is it doch an onus. It's something that's being done by force. It's not by choice. Und blois an Issa de Rabbanan. And it's only something which is rabbinically prohibited. And that's the Isser of Tchumen, the Isser of traveling on Shabbos on a train where you go out of the 2,000 Ames, and that's the Isser of Tchum. The gefinnen sich in a fahrenden Bahn is nicht an Asiyas Malacha, but the very presence on the train, when it's traveling on Shabbos, there's no Malacha of Shabbos involved in that. Is doch l'chayre tamua b'yaiser. If so, it's very difficult to understand the insistence of the Friedrich Rebbe. Was hat sich der Rebbe gestellt mit der Teikev gegen den Fahren und sich hereingestellt Teikev in a Matze von Sakana? Why was the Friedrich Rebbe so firm about this? And he placed himself immediately in a danger. L'chayre hat die erste Sache gedacht, gleich herausgehen von der Sakana Beisa Asurim. Seemingly, the first thing he should have done is left prison and to get himself out of a definite danger. Und danach suchen Eitzes, wie soll darfen fahren Shabbos. And then to seek different plans and ideas, what could be done that he should not have to travel on Shabbos. Azam ist es Nefesh an Hage, hat man gesehen beim Rebben in der ganze Zugang zu der Aveide von Arbatzas HaTorah v'Chizika Yihadis bei Medina Ahi. This approach of self-sacrifice was by the Friedrich Rebbe during the entire time of his work in spreading Torah and Yiddishkeit in that time in Soviet Russia. Wie gerät kam upon, and this was already explained a number of times, hat dem Rebbens Mesiris Nefesh herumgenommen, nicht bloß in Janim, in welchem is mechuyev sich Mesiris Nefesh sein. Friedrich Rebbe's self-sacrifice was not only regarding those matters that one is obligated to give up his life, nor euch in Janim, welche seine Begeder von hat Schuss bejadai. But even such matters where, according to some of the Paiskim, or some of the Rishainim, it's only one is allowed to give up his life, but is not obligated. And Nachmer, furthermore, Vigeret Amal Barucha, as was once explained, is a Mesiris Nefesh gewen auf euch auf azelche in Yonim, was kame gedeile bechachmi Yisrael haben gehalten, as me darf sich auf sie nit Mesiris Nefesh sein. His self-sacrifice was even for such matters that there were other great people amongst the Yidden that said that it's not necessary and one should not give up his life for this. Is wenn es redt sich wegen Klolus Haveide von Rebbe Medina Ahi. So if we would be discussing the general work of the Frierdiker Rebbe then in that country. Kann man auch verstehen, was seinen Hagis gewinnt bei Finkeseh. We can understand why the Frierdiker Rebbe was so firm and so insistent not to do anything that could lead to some whatever level of Chilul Shabbos. Because the fact that the Frierdiker Rebbe saw that the condition of the Yidden then, in that time, in that country, was of such, as the Etzem Kiyum von Yidden und Yiddishkeit is gestanden in Größer Sakana. The very existence of Yidden and their Yiddishkeit in that time was in danger. That the lamp of the Yidden, of the Neshama of the Yid, should not be extinguished, God forbid. Wissendig sein Schlichus als Nasi Yisrael, and knowing his mission as the leader of Yidden, was darf sorgen für ein Kiyum von Am Yisrael that has to be concerned and provide for the existence of Yidden in this world. Hat der Rebbe in seinem Mesiris Nefesh für Yidden sich nicht gerechnet mit keine Cheshbonis und keine Agbolis. So the Frierdiker Rebbe, with his self-sacrifice, made no calculations, and there was no limitations to this. This is regarding the general work of the Frierdiker Rebbe to save Klal Yisrael in that time period. Here, however, what we're discussing, the Frierdiker Rebbe refusing to leave prison because he may travel on Shabbos, wie bald as da is the Medubbe nit wegen an ihm, was riert dann al kopanim, toivas raben vitzibber. We're not discussing a detail in the story about the Frierdiker Rebbe leaving prison that will affect the well-being of the public and of all Yidden. This is a question about him personally. When is he going to travel to Kastrama? Should he travel Thursday night or wait until Sunday? So here the question is, why, even regarding such a matter, did the Frierdiker Rebbe have such a level of self-sacrifice? It would seem that the opposite would be the right approach. Durch der Anhage stellt ein in Sakane die ganze avoidische Leubar Botzes HaTorah v'chizuk hayados. With this kind of a behavior, the Frierdiker Rebbe is putting in danger the entire work of spreading Torah and strengthening Yiddishkeit in that time. So the answer and the explanation for this is, and the kudis inyan zeh. And the main point there is, hat sich da nit gehandelt, sie me soll sich je oder nit meiser nefesh sein zu lieb Shabbos. The discussion over here is not whether this is something that one should give up his life for the sake of Shabbos or not. That's not the point there. Nor da is gestanden die Scheile von Kiddush Hashem or the Chilul Hashem. Will Hashem's name be sanctified, that is, or will Hashem's name be the Chilul, defamed or profaned? That was the question that was standing in front of them at that time. Die Matore von die, was haben arrestiert dem Rebbe ist gewesen, kedei zu stellen, die Arbeit von Rebbe Bachzokes Hayades. The entire purpose of those that arrested the Frierdiker Rebbe was in order to disturb or to break apart the work of the Frierdiker Rebbe in strengthening Yiddishkeit. Ilu Yitzuye, als der Rebbe wollte nicht gleich gegengestellt sich, die Pekude, zu fahren bald noch sein Befreien Kurzoinam, als der Rebbe soll fahren in Shabbos, if the Frierdiker Rebbe would not stand strong and firm against their command that he should be released and then travel on Shabbos, wollte es für sie gewinnen an die Sachen. They would consider this to be a victory. The Rebbe had maskim given zu fahren b'Shabbos. That they got the Frierdiker Rebbe to agree to travel on Shabbos. The alle Herrer von the Askama, and anyone that would know and hear about what happened, about this agreement of the Frierdiker Rebbe, would not understand all the calculations mentioned above, as man is sich mestadel b'chashoi, man is sicher zu peil sein, as the Rebbe soll nit fahren Shabbos chulu, that definitely there is effort being made quietly, that the Frierdiker Rebbe should not have to travel on Shabbos, and all the additional points made before. That's something that people would not know about. The only thing that people will hear is that the Frierdiker Rebbe agreed to travel on Shabbos. So if this is a matter of Chilul Hashem, this is something that the Frierdiker Rebbe could not allow under any circumstances, and he stood firmly and insisted that he will not travel on Shabbos. On the Geret came upon him, it was explained many times as b'shas es retzach wegen Kiddush Hashem and Chilul Hashem. If it's an issue of sanctifying Hashem's name or the opposite, is nit negeit zu die Sach wegen welche es retzach is verbunden mit an Isra Chichomer oder na Isra Chikal. It doesn't matter if the subject is something which is a very severe matter or a very light matter. Wenn rechnet sich nah mit dem zu Menschen, arum seinen all zu austeitschen das als an Indien Hofchi. The only thing that matters is how is it going to be interpreted by people that are observing this and hearing about this. If people will see that this is the opposite of a Kiddush Hashem, so then it's a Chilul Hashem. If it's a Chilul Hashem, it doesn't matter what level of Yiddishkeit it is, Shabbos or only a suffix, a Chilul Hashem is a Chilul Hashem. And therefore the Friedrich Rebbe stood firm not to allow this Chilul Hashem. Und das ist echt die Scheiches von Gimmel Tammuz to Parshas Chukas. This is the connection of the day Gimmel Tammuz and the whole story behind it to what we see in this Parsha, Parshas Chukas. In Parshas Chukas wird erzählt wegen dem Chet von Mei Meriva. One of the stories in this week's Parsha is the story of Mei Meriva, when the Yidden didn't have water, and Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem tells him to speak to the rock, and it will provide water, and instead Moshe Rabbeinu hits the rock. Was zu lieb dem, seine Moshe v'Aaron nenish geworden as loy toviu es hakol hazeh la'aretz gomer. They were punished that they will not enter into Eretz Yisrael and will not deliver and bring the Yidden into the land. Is l'chayre nit verstandig. So here the question is, mit was is der Chet gewen as so har was zu lieb dem, soll Moshe nit arangehen in Eretz Yisrael? What is it about this sin specifically that was so severe that because of this Moshe can't enter into Eretz Yisrael? Und befragt, als die Teure erzählt, wegen noch in Yonah bei Moshe, was Moshe is zu lieb sein nanish geworden. There are other matters in the Teure that are related about what happened, that Moshe Rabbeinu did, that he was punished for them. Und von deswegen is for sein nit nanish geworden mit der Zahar benaynish. But for anything else, he was never punished like this, with such a severe punishment. Und dafke derchet, der Shinui zu schlagen dem Seller anstatt reden zu ihm, the fact that he changed, and instead of speaking to the rock, he hit it, hat gebracht die Gzeire Chamura, as soll nicht reingehen in Eretz Yisrael. This brought this very severe decree that he couldn't enter into the land. Now the time darauf wird angedatet in Pasuk. So the reason for this is indicated in the Pasuk itself, that Yan lo hemantem bi lo hagdisheni le'ene b'nei Yisrael. The reason for this severe punishment is because you have not sanctified my name in front of all of the Yidden. And Rashi is das Mavayr, as Rashi explains, as the far is der Chet, Mer Chomer, wie die Teine von Moshe Rabbeinu zum Eibishten hat Zayin u Bakar, Yishochet Lehem. That this, what happened here, which was in public, is even a greater sin than this that Moshe Rabbeinu says to Hashem in two parshas before, in parshas Baal Leischa, where the Yidden are asking for meat, and Moshe Rabbeinu says to Hashem, is it possible, are you able to provide so much sheep and cattle for the Yidden? So that's also seemingly questioning Hashem's ability. And nevertheless, over there, the punishment was not as severe as in this case. Since that was something that was private, so Hashem saved him from this kind of a punishment. The Khan, Shebemaimet, Kol Yisrael, here, since what happened was in the presence of all Yidden, so here he was not spared because of the necessity of him making a Kiddush Hashem, and the opposite happened, so therefore he was punished to this degree. So what do we see in this week's parsha? Das heißt, as wenn es retzich wegen aniyim von Kiddush Hashem oder Havchai, when we're speaking about a matter of sanctifying Hashem's name, where the opposite is negeya blois via zay das wird ausgeteilt durch andere. If it's happening in public and it's the way people will interpret this, the explanations that you have behind it are irrelevant. If it's a Kiddush Hashem, it's a Kiddush Hashem, and if it's the opposite, then it's the opposite. And therefore, in the case of the Friedrich Rebbe, he fought and he stood firm not to travel on Shabbos. A deeper in Yesh Leimar and then a deeper point can be said about the behavior of the Friedrich Rebbe in the story of the release on Gimmel Tammuz. Der Eifen an Hage Hanal von Rebbe. This kind of behavior that by the Friedrich Rebbe was hat sich gegengestellt die Pekude von die welche haben immer arrestiert. They stood up and fought all the commands of those that arrested him. Is given nit nor when es hat angeredet begale a Sach von Yiddishkeit. It wasn't only when it clearly touched the matter of the Yiddishkeit that the Friedrich Rebbe was fighting for. Nor wie der Rebbe hat erzählt, but as the Friedrich Rebbe himself related, as hat bei sich gemacht a festen Beschluss, that he made with himself a very firm resolution, as soll klar nit nispolven for sei, that he won't at all give any attention to their existence and to what they want. Nicht nur soll sich nicht rechnen mit sie in Sachen, was seine Negeye begolui zu Yiras Shamayim. And not only that he's not going to pay attention to their demands when it comes to matters of Yiras Shamayim, of fear of heaven, fear of Hashem. Und zu lieb deren Hage hat man den Rebbe bestraft mit die Yisuria Gof Rachman al-Itzlan und geschlagen v'chulu. And because of this behavior of the Friedrich Rebbe, that he was so fighting them to this degree, he suffered physically, and God forbid they hit him and so on. In Azan Hoge, regarding this behavior of the Frierdiker Rebbe, is doch nicht scheich die Cheshbeinis Anal von Kiddush Hashem, oder as es wird anreden der Arbeit von Arbotzas HaTorah. Here, the point made before that this is because of a matter of Kiddush Hashem, or because this is something that's relevant for the spreading of Torah and so on, that's not the point here. So the question is the Tam von dem Eifen Han Hoge von Rebbe? So what is the explanation for this kind of behavior of the Frierdiker Rebbe? To be so insistent and fighting and not listening to any of their demands and not to pay attention to them at all. Is euch the beer in dem Hoge nirmaz and Parshas Chukas gleich in Shema Sedra. Chukas. So this as well is hinted in the Parsha and in the name of the Parsha, the name Chukas. What does the name Chukas have in it? The Alter Rebbe is Mevayer, so the Alter Rebbe explains, as Chuke is Meloshen Chakika einkritzen. The word Chuka means to engrave. What is the point of engraving? The Yisrael from Chakike legabe ksiva, the advantage that there is when you engrave something more than when you write something on paper or parchment. By ksiva zene the ACS at zugegebene Sachsen klaf. When you're writing, the letters that you write are an added thing to the paper or to the parchment. On which you're writing. When you write, the letters do become one with the paper. Das ist aber bei von zwei Sachen. Was werden vereinigt. It's however two entities that are being unified as one. Und der Rebbe kennen dem sein Shinui bis bittel. Men can uptail and upmecken the ACs from them clavs. And therefore it is possible that there should be a change, it should fade, or even it should be erased completely, that the letters will be erased from the parchment. Which is not the case with engraving. The letters are not a separate entity from the material and where it's engraved. The letters are now read within the stone itself that you engrave it in. The letters are now part of the precious gem where you're engraving these letters in it. Und der Fahr is unmöglich abzuteilen die Eisies von dem Even. That unwritten the Eisies is unwritten the Even Teuf. You can't separate the letters from this stone. If you're touching the letters, that is the stone itself. The selbe Sach is Beruchnius. So just like it is physically, the same is also spiritually. When Avodas Hashem is blois wie hat zugegebene Sach zu dem Metzias Adam. When a person's involvement in serving Hashem is just this added feature to his existence, is meglech as in dem soll sein shinuyim. It's possible that there should be changes, even with a very strong dedication, but if it's not really who he is to his core, then there could be changes. Es kann sein amatziv, as man soll nicht mekayim sein an ihnen von Avodas Hashem, me'ezes sibbe shetia, koil leich as mizanoines. It would be possible that he will not fulfill something that's necessary to serve Hashem for whatever reason, including also something that's out of his control. Und sein Metzias soll dabei nicht werden angerührt. And yet, his entity for who he is not getting touched. Because in the end of the day, his existence, and then this that he's a servant of Hashem, is 2 points. If, however, a person being a servant and serving Hashem is something that's engraved in his very existence, Avodas Hashem, the fact that he's serving Hashem, it becomes a part of his very being. This is who he is. Demelt is nicht shaykh zu voneinander teilen von Avodas Hashem. Then it's impossible to separate the person from this that he's serving Hashem. Zunehmen von ihm, an inyan von Avodas Hashem, if you take away his ability to do what is necessary to serve Hashem, meint zunehmen zustellen sein Metzias. That means that you're taking away his very being. Al derech eine, was will zustellen, die Zuris Haisis von Even Teuv, darf sein schwierig Even Teuv. If you want to get rid of those letters that are engraved in this precious gem, so you'll have to break the stone itself. Only then could you get rid of the letters that are part of it. Und der Fahr bei Yidden, was Avodas Hashem is by him chokok benafshay, a Yid that's serving Hashem, and his service of Hashem is something that's completely engraved in his soul, is as a chmeise nefesh of kol prat uprat von Yiddishkeit. He will be ready for self-sacrifice in every detail of his Yiddishkeit, al cheshbainis, without any calculations at all. Was ist unmöglich voneinander teilen zwischen ihm und welche Inyan es soll sein von Avodas Hashem. It's impossible to separate the entity of the person and whatever matter it may be in serving Hashem. So, derech zeh is gewähnt die Anhage von Rebbe. This is the level of the behavior of the Avodas Hashem by the Friediger Rebbe. Wie bald, as in Yonim from Torah and Mitzvahs, zenen bei ihm gewen beifen shachakike. Matters of Torah and Mitzvahs were completely engraved in who he was. Is the Rebbe's Mesiris Nefesh nit gewen verbunden mit keine Cheshbainis. So therefore, his Mesiris Nefesh was not connected to any kind of calculations. In dem Fall halacha, as man darf sich Mesiris Nefesh sein, whether to make a calculation from a halachic perspective, is he obligated to be Mesiris Nefesh, or from a more practical perspective, is this something that's worthwhile? Will he gain the objective by being Mesiris Nefesh? All these calculations don't play a role if this is who you are, and giving this up is giving up your very self. By him is das nicht gewähn an Inyan from Mesiris Nefesh, tzli ban ande Sach, shechutz imeno. The Mesiris Nefesh here is not giving up one's life for something that's outside, an additional feature to his existence. By welcher es shayach a cheshbin sim soll sich Mesiris Nefesh sein. Here there could be a calculation whether one should be Mesiris Nefesh or not. Not das is gekommen ki ilu vi bederech memela. The Mesiris Nefesh is automatic. It's who he is. Wie bald as Avodas Hashem is given a tale from Zay Metzias Gufa. Serving Hashem is part of his very existence. Biz, as it is unmöglich zu voneinander teilen zwischen sie, it's impossible to distinguish between the two, is bederach memela. Bei ihm given alle Inyanim von Avodas Hashem. Bis zu Mesiris Nefesh. So if he exists, all matters of Avodas Hashem exist as well, as part of him, to the point of Mesiris Nefesh. It's an automatic thing, part of his very existence. Und high time is ein Mesiris Nefesh gewähn, nicht nur auf Sachen, was haben begolli ungeriert sein Aveda, and therefore the self-sacrifice of the Friediger Rebbe was not only regarding such matters which openly and directly affected his serving Hashem, nor hat sich Mesiris Nefesh gewähn auf nicht nachweren, but this also included a Mesiris Nefesh not in any way to be subdued by those that arrested him and on any level. Sein nit rechnen sich mit sei is nit nor gewen an ihm von Cheshbon. Because again, the point here is that the fact that he did not give them any attention and did not allow himself to be under their control in any way wasn't something that he made a conscious calculation about. Nor hat beetzen nit gekent nicht mehr werden beeise öfen shahu farazelige was stern die Arbeit von Abbas Satayre Cholo. It's impossible for the Friediger Rebbe that his entire identity consists of this Avodas Hashem to be in any way subdued to those that they are arresting him to stop his Avodah. Mibalt, as the Avodah is by him and an Eifen von Chukas, being that his serving Hashem and all of the work that he's doing is Chukas, which means Chakike Minei Obei, something that's completely and thoroughly engraved in him, in his very existence.